Good evening. Welcome to Economics 330, Global Trade and Political Economy, City University of New York, MAC. Today, of course, is Tuesday, November 25th, 2025. And welcome to Office Hour, or at least the lecture portion of Office Hour for Module 12. And as I hope you now know from this week's assessment, and by the way, this week's assessment is due by 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday, tomorrow, 11:59 p.m. Eastern, tomorrow. As of course you should know, Thursday is holiday, Thanksgiving, as is Friday. So the school week ends tomorrow at 11:59 p.m. and that's when your weekly assessments are due. So please turn them in and turn them in on time. Um, Moving forward, our discussion will be for this week, of course, as I'm sure you would have discerned from your weekly readings and assessments, our discussion will be on international economic development. Today's lecture will focus on the drivers of economic development. We will also discuss IPE perspectives, historical materialism, liberal and realistic perspectives on the linkage between economic development and trade relations. I hope that we all now fully understand the IPE perspectives. Um, Notably, the plight of underdeveloped and poverty-stricken nations has been, at least in part, attributed to the structure of global trade relations. Let's see. Okay, we're good there. Indeed, many people around the world live in poverty. Many nations in Africa, Asia, Central and South America are economically underdeveloped. For perspective, consider that there are many places in the world where people live on less than $5 per day. So, what should an effective theory of development contemplate? Liberal economic theory holds that a liberalized global market and trading system is the best way to increase economic development and growth because each country specializes in producing goods and services in which it has a comparative advantage. However, this view has been subjected to contention for decades. There is evidence that simply removing barriers to trade and opening markets has not led to the development and growth of underdeveloped and poverty-stricken nations. Rich countries and large corporations dominate the global marketplace and create unequal relations of power and information. Consequently, trade is inherently unequal, and poor countries seldom experience rising out of increased unemployment, poverty, and income inequality. An additional problem is that free trade is not equally free. Non-market policies such as subsidy cause a misalignment between price and production cost in the global economy. This non-market practice impairs the efficient operation of the free market system. Furthermore, trade is still dominated by multinational corporations whom new trade deals are thought to disproportionately benefit. A good and ongoing non-market practice concern would be the Chinese EV industry. And I only bring this up because this is where one sector where there is near universal consensus that there's overcapacity in the production of electric cars in China, mostly driven by government subsidy. And this overcapacity is now dumped on international markets. Consequently, many countries in North America, US, Canada especially, EU countries, and indeed South America, including Brazil, that is part of the BRICS system of which China is a leading member. They have all instituted tariffs against uh, Chinese electric cars because of the sense that the cars are being dumped and that they enjoy undue market advantage because of subsidies. So, so despite this example of subsidies, on the other hand, the liberal view will argue that least developed countries or LDC's economic problems stem from inefficient domestic policies than from their dependent position in the global economy. So this theory suggests that the bigger driver of underdevelopment in least developed countries are endogenous rather than exogenous. That is, the drivers are mostly because of internal problems within that country. That there are that this is really the bigger driver rather than their dependent position in the international economic and trading system. So, to repeat, the liberal view will argue that least developed countries or LDC's economic problems stem more from inefficient domestic policies than from their dependent position in the global economy. Indeed, liberals often see North-South interdependence linkages as providing more benefits for the global South than the global North. By this logic, least developed countries that follow open market economic policies and increase linkages with the North are therefore more likely to achieve successful development. Although, while liberals encourage least developed countries to follow open market oriented policies, interventionist liberals, also called reformist liberals. So there isn't a monolith of our philosophies within the liberal camp. So while some liberals would argue that the bigger driver for economic underdevelopment in least developed countries is endogenous, the the reformist wing of the liberal ideology would argue differently, right? So the interventionist branch of the liberal philosophy recognized that North-South inequalities can put least developed countries at a disadvantage, whereas orthodox liberals emphasize equal treatment and reciprocity. Interventionist liberals call on the North to consider special needs of the global South. Even so, interventionist liberals believe that necessary changes can occur within the existing capitalist order and do not, as such, share the fate of other liberals, and do, of course, share this, and as such, they share the fate of other liberals in private enterprise and in the market. So, despite the differences on what the primary driver for the divergent outcomes in LDCs and industrialized countries, they share a common belief in private enterprise and the market. Not surprising, historical materialists, dependency theorists reject the liberal view that least developed countries' economic problems result mostly from inefficient domestic policies. Instead, they see capitalist states in the core of the global economy as either underdeveloping least developed countries on the periphery or preventing them from attaining genuine autonomous development. Historical materialists will further argue that class linkages also play a role, with elites in the global south, the comprador class. Again, remember that the global south can be shorthand for least developed countries. They argue that there is a linkage with the elites in the global south collaborating with capitalists in the north to reinforce the pattern of least developed country dependency. Of note, world system theorists have modified the dependency argument by introducing a third category of countries, the semi-periphery. This is because some least developed countries, such as in East Asia and a few more in Latin America, can now be described as newly industrializing economies. Countries, and you can think of, say, Vietnam in this category. On some level, you can think about Brazil, Vietnam in Asia, and Brazil in South America as newly industrializing economies. Countries may move upmarket from the periphery to the semi-periphery, or even the core. Think about South Korea. But this only rarely occurs. Some historical materialists call for a redistribution of resources from the core to the periphery. Others believe that the core will never willingly transfer resources. Building on this foundational knowledge, we can now advance the following four learning outcomes. The first learning outcome is to describe the role of the World Bank in promoting and assisting economic development. As I'm sure everybody in the class now knows, World Bank's core goal is to reduce poverty in a planet that is livable. And that's a paraphrase. And in many ways, it does this by extending facilities to build infrastructure and economic development in developing and least developing countries, especially. The second learning outcome is to describe and explain export-led growth strategy. A typical example of an export-led growth strategy is China, which that is considered the manufacturing capital of the world. Most of China's economic growth and its gross domestic product does not, unlike the United States, is not driven by domestic consumption, but rather manufacturing at a competitive advantage and selling to the rest of the world and serving as a manufacturing hub for the rest of the world. The third learning outcome is to describe and explain import substitution development strategies. That is protection and incubation of newly formed domestic industries into fully developed sectors so that goods produced are competitive with imported goods. So imagine, again, and I use this, and I use China as an example several times in this class because arguably since the United States emerged post World War II as the global hegemon, no other country has grown economically and geopolitically as rapidly as China has. So there are lots of things that happen in China that I consider instructive. And if you really wanted to think about a classic import substitution development strategy, you could again look at China's auto industry, where it had a policy that termed 50 plus 2. And this policy was simple because China recognized that it had a large market and the best auto companies had an interest in selling cars in China. That was the place they were going to find their next growth. But China limited. Oh, China set up huge tariffs for imported cars into China. So if you wanted to manufacture a car in your domestic country and then export the car to China for sale, you would pay such a huge tariff that the price of that car would be uncompetitive. Alternatively, China would also give you the option to skip and escape that tariff by setting up manufacturing within China. However, if you wanted to manufacture in China when the 50 plus 2 policy was enforced, you, the foreign company, must partner with a domestic Chinese partner, and you, the foreign company, may not own more than 50% of this joint venture. And you, the foreign auto partner, may not have more than 2 joint ventures. You can see how this policy rapidly transferred skills in auto manufacturing from established auto brands, especially in Western countries, to their Chinese counterpart. And once China realized that it has built up its domestic capacity through protection and incubation, of course, tariffs provided the protection. And incubation was provided by these joint partnerships that quickly and rapidly built up the capacity of the Chinese domestic auto industry. So this would be a classic example of being able to describe and explain import substitution and development strategies. The fourth and last learning outcome is to explain the infant industry argument and its justification in economic growth strategies. The main rationale behind the infant industry argument is that new industries require protection because they lack the economies of scale that competitors possess. Infant industries often lack the capability to leverage their existing production and thus require protection until they can acquire economies of scale at a similar level to their global competitors. So understand what this means. To understand this, you need to understand amortization, right? If it costs you, I don't know, $1,000 to design and manufacture a car, the more of those cars that you sell, the more you can spread the cost of design and manufacturing. The more you can spread your cost of design and manufacturing across multiple cars and thereby improving your capital position and quite likely your profitability. But to do this, you have to be able to have scale. You have to be able to have a reasonably large market share. And this is the infant industry argument and its justification in economic growth, right? This is how you protect infant industries until they're able to acquire scale, right? That at least on roughly the same level as their competitors. So these are the learning outcomes that you should have at the end of this week's readings and your assessment. But again, to highlight and reiterate, your assessments are due tomorrow, Wednesday, 11:59 p.m. Eastern, not Friday. Again, this is because Thursday and Friday are public holidays and there is no school. Of course, Thursday is Thanksgiving. And with that, I hope that each and every one of us have a lot to give thanks for. And I hope that each and every one of us enjoy Thanksgiving with family and loved ones. And with that, I'll see you again. Next week's lecture would be on international debt crisis. Thank you, and wish you good luck. Turn in your assessment on time, 11:59 p.m. tomorrow, Wednesday, November 26th, 11:59 p.m. Eastern. Take care.